content over everything.
Right, I wanted to talk about something and get it on camera. I wanted to call out certain academic institutions in the West for bias and possibly racism in much of their academic work. Specifically, I want to call out Harvard University and the Reich Lab, the genetics group at Harvard University, Dr. Reich's lab, for possibly having bias in some of the studies and the papers that they published. Now, I think that this is important because many of the genetic studies that they've published is used by ethnocentrism and white nationalism in Europe and other places. And I believe that a lot of their data is not correct that they've been publishing. And I've seen many people actually cite these studies to make these white nationalist arguments for the supremacy of the white race. Now, the problem is that basically what it is that in about 100 or 200 years ago, these Europeans, they had this theory that the Europeans, the kind of Aryan white race, these were the theories of Hitler, is that the Europeans invaded Iran and India and took the white genes and the white languages into India and into Iran and those places, right? And they think like all these races were separate. So they think like the white race was separate and the Anatolians were separate and the Indians were separate. And now, because we have some similarities, what they're trying to say is like these are similar now because the white people actually invaded all these other countries and took their genes into these other countries, right? But we actually have data, and they have data that disproves this theory, but they're not publishing the data, right? They've got this data and they're not publishing it, right? So we need to make sure that these guys don't try and hide this data. So 2 years ago, there was a big study that Harvard University done, right? Where they had hundreds of samples from Central Asia, and they called it the genetic history of South and Central Asia. So the genetic history of Central Asia and India, Pakistan, all this stuff. What they said was these European peoples invaded South Asia and Central Asia and Iran and gave them the civilization of South Asia and all that stuff, right? But they actually have data that disproves it. I mean, they have the data, but they're not publishing it, right? So now, okay, I actually saw this data in their database, and I asked this guy, I said, from Harvard, I said, can you check this out? Because this is inconsistent with what you're looking at. So this guy said, yeah, he's going to look at it, but I think he's just going to try and hide it and say, because these Western institutions, right, these academic institutions like Harvard, the nationalism in Britain, the royal family, the kind of financial system, it's all built upon this nationalism where the Europeans are superior to all these other races. And this goes back to the foundation of Western nationalism, of the sense of Britain, the identity, the British identity, which was always this kind of, we're superior to these other races, you know. So if you look at, for instance, Iran, the Iranian language and culture shares a lot of similarities with the Germanic peoples, with English, right? English is very close to Iranian language, the myths and the culture, the history, even genetics is not that far apart. But they will try and hide it and say, no, there's no similarities there. Because they want people in England to think that the Iranians and the Chinese and everyone are their enemies. So they create this false sense that this race is separate, that race is separate, that race is separate. So there's a lot of falsification in academia around genetics. It's all pseudoscience, right? Like some of the stuff done by the Reich Lab, by David Reich and Nick Patterson, Vagish Narasimhan. Some of this is really, really low quality, right? And you know, there's data that disproves it, but people just believe it because these ethno-nationalists, they want to believe in that stuff. So what these guys do, okay, the kind of nationalistic powers is that they say the Iranians are your enemies, the Chinese are your enemies, because they want the people of this country to be united against an enemy so that we don't call out the establishment for their bullshit, right? Because the establishment is abusing the people of this country so they can make more money, right? They want, to have more money. They want flashy cars. They want yachts. They like to buy expensive jewelry, all this stuff, right? They want to have advantages. If we criticize them, They're afraid of that. So they would always say, oh, you're British, we should fight Iran, we should fight China, right? And they're even falsifying ancient DNA to make out as if the British and the Europeans are separate from the Iranians and the South Asians, okay, which they're not, right? It's all false. Now, that sample, okay, which is in the data set, that's called Zaman Baba N, right? And that shows that the whole study that was done by the Reich lab that said that these Europeans are separate and that they invaded Iran and Central Asia is all fake, right? That sample is there. And I want to make sure, and if anyone's watching this, right, anyone in the media, we got to make sure that we hold these guys accountable so that they actually look at that sample and data correctly. Because what we're seeing, what I'm seeing, when I look at the ancient DNA, what I'm seeing is like all humans, they were in Africa, right? And then they left Africa and they went to India, right? And Central Asia. And from Central Asia, all these Eurasians separated out. So the Turks, they went that way, the Iranians went that way, the Europeans went that way, but they were all together in Central Asia. That's why these Europeans and Indians have a similar DNA, because it's like a tree, right? All these races are like a tree. So from Africa, they go through South or East India, then they go to North India, Central Asia, and then they separate into different races. So it's like a tree. But what they want to say is that, no, we're not related like that. They're saying that the white race is separate. We're separate, and all the races are separate, right? And so this is identity about race, like, oh, we're all separate, we should be fighting each other. And so their idea is like, we were all separate, and then we invade, and they think that they invaded other countries. They say that as Europeans, we invaded India and Pakistan and Iran and all these places, right? So that justifies the invasions now, even today, and that justifies ethno-nationalism and racism, right? So these things, these theories that are put forward by the Reich lab, these are all racist theories, right? Harvard University, the Reich lab, it's just racism. Okay, these are the same theories that Hitler believed in, that are still being proposed today, even though there's data that disproves it. They're hiding this data. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to put it out there, right? And these are the same racist theories that have been existing for 100 years, and still today that they still exist, right? And all these institutions in academia still have are pushing these racist theories. So we got to make sure that these guys, we don't let them push these racist theories. We make sure that they look at those samples, that Zaman Baba N sample, which disproves their racist theories, actually proves that humans are that all these races are like a tree and they're separated out from Central Asia rather than being separate races. And that we're all similar. So we got to make sure that they look at it. And that's about all I wanted to say.
Content over everything. Content over everything. From your Benjamin.
Man, say it straight. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. Listen. COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. I just listen to COE. Man, don't listen to BBC. Man, don't listen to ITV. I don't even listen to Sky YG. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. Man, just listen to COE. If you see me, it's COE. Content over everything. COE.
Man, not in no BBC. Man, not in no ITV. Not even listen to the MUM. They just listen to COE. Sorry, mommy, I'm lying. But listen to your mum,
Does it matter? Do you, I mean, the implication